probably do an in-depth review of the entire series later, but I figure I need to get something out here about in Gates McFadden documentary series, The Center Seat, sort of the unauthorized, behind-the-scenes history of Star Trek. Told by the folks who were there. Well, in the sense of the original series, what few are left that can talk about them? Because unfortunately, most of them have kind of gone by, and those who are left aren't really in a position to know the whole thing because they're not, it's not Gene Roddenberry, it's not Lucille Ball, it's, Bob Justman, Herb Solow, I think, also recently passed. But few things have cropped in that are really the stuff of fan legend and lore, but not actual fact. One of the things that stuck out to me was they go in. It starts off basically a brief history of Desilu, and also a little thing of what Roddenberry was doing prior to Star Trek. And they touch upon the infamous thing of the Lieutenant, and particularly the episode To Set It Right, the one which kind of set NBC up against Roddenberry back in that time, but also because of the fallout from that episode. And the old myth that they refused to air the episode. Wrong! They did air that episode on schedule, on time, and they even reran it in the summer repeats. Because if you think about it, it's about trying to deal with the issue of racism within the Marine Corps. Which, yeah, I know anybody who's been in the military, to this day you still got the end. But at the time, they did not want to even acknowledge that there were any racists in the Corps. No. And the Pentagon, the sequence of events goes, you have this episode. Roddenberry didn't even write it. There's another writer who wrote it. It may have been an idea from him. He did that all the time. Where he just drew a whole bunch of story ideas, just like one or two line plots. And say, hey, do something with that. And had them out. But it's basically a conflict between a black Marine and a white Marine. They had known each other in civilian life and did not get along, and this carries over, and they go through the whole episode of Lieutenant Rice, which is Gary Lockwood's character, trying to get them to get past it in a way, trying to be kind of a white savior, and he gets called out on that by his captain, played by Robert Vaughn. It's like, Lieutenant, you are not paid to be a babysitter. You need this is not your forte, but if you want to, I'll let you do it for now. I'm going to keep an eye on you on how it's going. And it goes along, and there has been some criticism of typical TV at the time, where they try and take on a complex issue like that and just neatly wrap it up with a bow at the end of the hour. It's like, that's not how it works. So there's that. It tackled an important issue at the time, but it also kind of soft pedaled it. So, but that's another issue. But the fact is, they got this episode, came in, and of course, I had to go. The thing is, the Lieutenant, for most of its run, had free and unfettered access to Camp Pendleton in San Diego for use as a filming location, and actual Marines march around the background as extras. So it saved the production a lot of time. They didn't have to build on the back lot. They didn't have to hire extras. Right? They could go down to Camp Pendleton and film the real thing. It helped the authenticity and everything. It helped sell the show, and it was a hit show at the time. But then the thing is, you had to run these scripts by the Pentagon, so that you're not portraying something that they didn't want to see, and they didn't want to see this. That we will deal with this problem, so we don't need you, people poking your nose in here and things. And they said, they threatened that if you run this episode, we're going to pull support. You will no longer have access to Camp Pendleton. And from the producer's point in mind, it's like, and also, TV has gone through ebbs and flows. Early days, when you're playing to the higher demographic, because TVs were expensive, only rich and college educated could afford them, you could play a little more highbrow and take on some of the meatier issues and more sophisticated jokes. By the time of the 60s, though, TVs were cheaper, regular folks were having them, and so in the mindset of the producers, at least, at the time, the network execs, you had to play it to the lowest common denominator for the most part if you want to have a hit show and get competing against it, so you couldn't be as highbrow. So the whole thing of taking on the social issues and commentary stuff, fell out of favor. 10 years earlier, this episode, Lieutenant, probably would have gone unchanged. It would have been fine. But the thing is, we're no longer in that period, so oddly enough, Gene could be accused of being behind the times at the time. But they also didn't, they're trying to be, good progressive liberals themselves. They didn't want to shoot it now, but and Gene took advantage of this because, they I think somehow they got through production of this thing, and it wasn't until that point where they started that we can't run this. We'll lose the Pentagon. They've already said so. If we run this thing, we're losing the Pentagon. Well, Gene screened the episode for the local NAACP. They sang praises to high heaven and said, "This is the kind of this stuff television should be doing, gammit." And so put them in a position of, if they don't run it, they're kowtowing to the military-industrial complex and being insensitive to racial issues. They're not being good progressive liberals like they said they were. So you embarrassed NBC into running the episode. And again, they ran it on schedule, and they ran it, in the summer repeats too. And it's mentioned in older interviews with Ron. Yeah, I had an episode they were objecting to. They ran it, and they lost support of the Pentagon. That's the thing. Think about it. If they didn't run the episode, they wouldn't have lost support of the Pentagon. They did lose support of the Pentagon. Ergo, it kind of makes sense. They ran the episode. That's why they got in trouble. And network and studio execs who have producers who make them spend money they feel they didn't have to, they hold a grudge. Okay. So yeah, it was, somewhat acclaimed for the time because it was actually tackling an issue. But again, it did have ramifications. And this would come in later partially when they kind of blew their shot at CBS for Star Trek. This, a couple years later, because this February '64 is when they ran the episode. And even at the time in the trades, about a month there, they've been known that Roddenberry's working on a science fiction concept for his next show. It was in a little blurb in Variety from January '64. Yeah, and Roddenberry was working on a sci-fi show for them. And so, March of '64 is when the first the pitch came out with Robert April and the Yorktown, and it starts making the rounds. And finally gets picked up by Desilu, Herb Solo, because they're looking to do newer stuff and get out of it where they're doing nothing but sitcoms. And they get the two of the most expensive pilots, like Mission Impossible and Star Trek. But in shopping around to find a network who'd be interested in this show, again, they blew the shot with CBS, mainly because Herb didn't do the pitch. Oscar Katz, I think Desilu had an in with CBS because of Lucy. She pretty much made the network the big juggernaut with I Love Lucy. And he was so enamored. Yeah, and he just grabbed Gene and they went over, and in an event they helped them answer some questions they had in producing Lost in Space that they'd already picked up, but they weren't quite sure how they're going to pull it off. And Roddenberry was a pretty good producer, and in the sense of solving production problems and how do you do something that's more expensive as all hell, and how to do it cheap. And he, kind of naively on his part, because he's been around long enough, he should know better. But he said, well, you do this sort of thing, and you just this is how you get around this, or how you make this look a little more better than it would have been. And okay, yeah, well, thanks for all this, but we decided to go with another thing. We're going with this Lost in Space idea we got. It's like basically they'd already committed to Lost in Space, and what they said was not good enough to justify doing two fancy schmancy spaceship shows. So. But thanks for the help on this one, you son of a bitch. So Herb comes, okay, Oscar, no, let me handle this. Because Herb was an NBC guy. He was a former executive there, so he had friends on with Grant Tinker and Mort Warner and all the top execs at CBS. Important. So they had to work on this. It's like, Gene, don't say, because Gene was. At that time, Gene was kind of like, kind of a Tim Burton type, kind of a weird little. So there was a large part of, Herb telling, okay, Gene, just sit there and look pretty. Let me do the talking. Okay, I know these guys. I can get them to buy it. And sure enough, he got him in there. And Grant Tink, another had said that they bought the show because of their affection for Herb. Because they were in no mood to deal with Roddenberry again. Not after, the thing with the lieutenant, where he kind of embarrassed them. Made them look bad before the NAACP thing. They were trying in their own little way to try and advance certain social causes, but they didn't want to do it in your face type of thing. And that's a little lesson that Roddenberry learned too. You want to do these things, you can't do it blatantly. Tell them this is an issue you need to think about it. If it's bad, and if you like it, and you're bad because of it, you got to do it a little more subtle. But no, they did air that episode, and they aired it twice. But with it only being a one-season show, because Roddenberry pissed them off so much, they didn't renew it. And then Robert Vaughn goes on to do, Man from U.N.C.L.E. pretty much right afterwards. Probably did. I think there was also on the MGM lot, so they, same route to work. But because of that, they, again, that's sort of why they picked The Cage as the script. Yeah, and they also danced around that one a bit in this one. And this has been gone into. This is nothing really new, but it's the stuff that's not really gone into in detail a lot, except in the book Herb Solow and Bob Justman put out, Inside Star Trek, where they get the rationale. Why, of the three scripts they chose, they offered up as possible pilots, why they chose The Cage as the pilot. And also, it plays into why they went with the second pilot. I think it was Warner called up, Herb Solow afterwards. And this is where it kind of came out, why they chose this script. And why they felt they kind of sandbagged him by choosing that script. Because they chose The Cage because this was the hardest one of the three that they felt that could be pulled off. The other two were, it's like it was Mud's Women was one. I think the Omega Glory might have been in there. Or a couple of them were just like, nah, that's not really challenging. We want to see what you can really do. They wanted, if we're going to work with Roddenberry again, you better make it worth our while. And this one with the weird aliens and the planet and all that, no, that looks like the toughest one. If you can pull this off, we'll be convinced. And he did, and for the most part, he did pull it off. He kind of fell on the part of producing basically a space western. It was the Wagon Train to the Stars with the cell line. And the thing reference to the show Wagon Train. So your guest stars, or you got a few continuing characters, and the people running the train, but you'd meet somebody new, in this wagon over here. We haven't seen that one yet. And there's your story. And the idea was, it's just six guns and phasers instead of six guns and spaceships instead of horses type thing. But it's the same kind of rock'em sock'em action. And he didn't quite deliver on that. He did deliver, like I said, it was the common line for the longest time was too cerebral for the slobs in the general television audience. But the fact this was not a lightweight story, and they did appreciate that. This was a very intelligent story, and they didn't reject it because it sucked. That's the line I'm getting sick and tired of hearing. That's not a bad. It's not a bad episode at all. It's just it's not what they were looking for, and that's why then when Mort Warner and Herb told her, okay, Herb, we feel kind of bad here because we kind of sandbagged you a bit. We picked that one because it was the hardest one, and you did deliver for the most part. This was very spectacular, but we're still not convinced that Roddenberry can pull this off for real. And that's where Herb came. Well, how about we just do a second pilot and something closer to what you like? Because we got all these sets, and again, you got the notes for who to hold, who to keep, and we're still working on the model, the big one. So yeah, we're working. We still got stuff around. How about we just do a second pilot this time cheaper, and hopefully a little more action and stuff. And so okay, fine, we'll do that. And I'm sure, Desilu, went along. Lucy did not put her own money into the show. That's, again, the line from the producers. Rule number one of show business: never put your own money in the show. Rule two: never put your own money in the show. Lucy's an enough hand and known that, okay? And so, but it did not. So the studio did not have to put a whole lot into it. You already had the sets, you had the costumes, slight reworking of some of the props, but it's mostly a bottle show if you look at it. There's a couple of interesting effects there, like the cloud barriers. It's a cloud tank. Black, You don't know what a cloud tank is. This is old technology. It's good, but it's like you got a tank basically. It's like. And it's different. You get one fluid, different types. It's not water. It's like something like oil, and then you got water, and then you put the paint stuff in between, swirl it around, and that's how you make clouds for movies. And that's it. Then just had it with a black background, shine a light from an angle at it, and get some pink and white paint swirling around there, and there's your barrier. It's an old It's an old, camera trick. It's fairly cheap. And again, in the meantime, they've been working on the model, adding some lights here and there, and getting some stock footage here. So it wasn't that much. And again, the slight redress of the sets. The planet set is it's the same thing as Talos 4. You just change the lighting a bit. You bring in some of the stuff like a lot of the stuff in the Delta set, the Delta Vega stuff. That you see the same things show up in engineering, and they may have been also in the cage system. But they lose all that. And if you notice in the transporter room, that's the helm console just up on a pedestal. They did it in both ones. So it was a case of they did that a bit on the cheap. It was a hell of a lot cheaper in the first, because the first pilot was the most expensive television pilot ever filmed at that point. And Where No Man's Gone before, considerably less. I think probably because I bet Jeffrey Hunter cost a hell of a lot more than Bill Shatner at the time. And again, the whole story about how they lost Jeffrey. They wanted to keep Jeffrey Hunter. He was he was not on the nose that get it right. Everybody. No, they wanted to keep Jeff Hunter. He was a name. And his career was, could have used the boost, but he also wanted to be able to occasionally go off and do the occasional movie. And his wife was really not interested in him being a science fiction. He's a movie star. He's a line Roddenberry saying, I can deal with Jeff. I can deal with Jeff and his agent. I can deal with Jeff and his kind of gorilla, but I cannot deal with that woman. So it's like, we'll let him go. And Bill Shatner was coming off of a highly acclaimed but little seen lawyer show on CBS, which had the unfortunate fate of being up against Bonanza at its peak, and nobody was watching anything but Bonanza at that point. It's a little black and white lawyer show on CBS, and where there's, by this point, NBC is the all-color network, because RCA on it, they want to sell a lot of color TVs. That's why they also love Star Trek. Lots of colors. So remember, Lost in Space was in black and white first season, but no, so the network ponied up, and I'm sure Desilu also had to pony up some money there, but it was not Lucy digging in her own pocket, because again, it's still debatable whether Lucy ever read the script for The Cage. He delivered it, Herb Solo delivered it to her in her dressing room. And when he saw her again, the script was still sitting in the exact same spot he put it. So it's like, this debatable whether she ever actually looked at the damn thing. But she trusted Herb. She had a way of, the thing of trusting people. No, I'm trusting this guy to do it right. And he, for the most part, he kind of delivered. I don't know what other shows he brought in besides Mission Impossible and Star Trek, but he had to brought in some. I should dig that up, because everyone went with like Star Trek, Mission Impossible, maybe Mannix. Okay, that may have been during his tenure, but. And she did have to fight her board, the grumpy old men of the board who wanted to, all they saw was a sea of red ink. It's going to kill us. This show is going to bankrupt. No. It's gonna be a hit. Again, and for the most part, the ratings were not bad for Star Trek. It won the night oftentimes, or at least came in second. And but again, it's one of those cases of the show was too expensive to justify the ratings they were getting. If it had been like a top 10 show, they would have put up with the expense of doing on their space show at the time. Like Mission Impossible. That was a higher rated show, and it actually cost more than Star Trek. So. Yes. No, you're just sitting there watching the magic happen here. Yes, I'm keeping this in, by the way.
She's an asshole. Someone else is.
What? Oh, they're talking about the cat. Okay. Yeah, just to manage a few things. Like, no, they did air to set it right, and it got the response. It did address the issue of racism, and but just in general. It did kind of soft sell it a bit. I've seen the episode. I have it downloaded. It's in the DVD set, and yeah, it aired in reruns. So let's put that out of your mind right now. It's like, there's a tendency sometimes to overblow something. They bravely admit they refused to air it. No, they did. Okay, get over yourself. And again, overselling Lucy's role in something. Yes, she was important because she bought the show and kept it on even above the objections of her own board of directors. But it wasn't she was some kind of uber fan. I mean, unfortunately, so much of this stuff is not actually documented. I would love to see a photo surface of them filming, doing the last shot for Where No One Has Gone Before. It was on the Delta Vegas, Planet set, and they're having problems. It was the camera was tracking on this track, and the thing is, there was debris that just kept interfering with the track, and their next soundstage over, ready with the wrap party, with they're ready to pop the corks on the champagne and having have the hors d'oeuvres and everything. And Lucy comes over, and she's in a little sparkly cocktail dress and hair done up flaming red, and wonder what is going on. And we're waiting here, waiting for this last shot, and as Goldstone, James Goldstone was the director. I thought, what's the hold up here? Well, we're trying to get this last up. I think, and Lucy, anything I can do? I thought, well, tell you what, if you can get a broom and sweep the crap out in the front of the thing, we can get this last shot. And sure enough, she grabs a broom. She's an old trooper. She grabs a broom, sweep it ahead of the camera so it gets on the track. Get the shot. Boom. All right, we're done. Wrap it. Go next door and get drunk. We're done. I would love to see a picture of that. Okay, someone had to have had a camera somewhere nearby, or behind the scenes, or another camera filming some of this stuff, and just with Lucy sweeping in front of the thing. But to my knowledge, that is the only direct involvement Lucy had with the production of Star Trek, is getting that last shot in the second pilot. And the irony is that because as much as the bleeding was, not just with Star Trek, and the Mission Impossible was just about as expensive, if not a little more. Mannix, I think by that point, was also more expensive, than either of those two shows. But again, they were doing better in the ratings, and therefore they could justify it, with the networks. And no one was talking about it, but Star Trek, it was like Battlestar Galactica was a top 25 show, but it cost $1 million an episode back when that actually meant something. Back in the late 70s, it was like $1 million an episode. It was like, wow. Nowadays, that's pretty common. The Next Generation was $1 million an episode, and while somewhat impressed, people barely blinked. And the thing is, adjusted for inflation, that's how much the original series cost per episode. In $1966, it was $189,000 an episode, but just for inflation, it was about $1 million an episode. The difference is that the original series was having to pretty much create all this stuff from scratch. Later shows, they had stuff they could pull from. There's a lot of And again, the original series also, reused a lot of stuff. They find oddball things. Some of the weird board games, like I think the 3D chess set was created by them, but there was also kind of a 3-level checker thing that came from the stores, and there was other things, round playing cards that was out of the stores. That wasn't totally unknown, and a few little doodads here and there. So one thing was like some kind of little answer machine type thing. There was a lot of stuff. Star Trek Phase 2 or New Voyages. They did a lot of stuff, researching a lot of stuff, and finding these actual objects and bringing them to the screen and doing that. But a lot of stuff is also they had to do from scratch. They had to make their own costumes. That's why you got a lot of parallel Earth stories, so that they could go into the existing costume stores and costume supply. Yeah. This is an old West, planet this time. Okay, we're doing modern day 20th century Rome type thing. That's where that comes from. Beyond being able to do a meaningful commentary on modern day Earth, it was also a hell of a cost savings. If they could just go in and it's happened to look. Also they gave them a chance to use the backlot, which was actually the same backlot they used for the Andy Griffith Show. It's really, you can really tell it and sitting in the edge of forever. And you can spot Floyd's barbershop nearby there. It's like, hey, and like for Mary with a big opening thing, they dirtied the hell out of the place. But yeah, that's Town Square in Mayberry. Of stuff there. I'm not going to say don't watch it. I'm not saying they got anything wrong, but I'm sure for the later shows when you're dealing with stuff that that like Gates McFadden and others were actually there for. So it's like they personally experience this stuff, and they have more people around who weren't in a position to know what the hell's going on in the front office. Then but for original series, there's a few misconceptions that are slipped in there. So, again, I'll probably do a more detailed review when I've had a chance to sit down and watch it just by myself. Because Steph was watching it and I was kind of paying attention. Mainly listening for things like, they never... No, they did it. Okay, yeah, I know what to do with it. So... we'll be doing more on this as we go in there. But one thing I wanted to get, because, they originally got the DVD set for my birthday. And yeah, it's got the entire thing, but it's also got some extras on there. It has full interviews with Leonard Nimoy, Nichelle Nichols, and Kirstie Alley. And I'm very interested in seeing that. But, but I do, definitely, I want to do a better, closer review of the first episode. Sure, anything else slinked in there that no, that's not quite right. So we will talk at you later.